Welcome back to Tech Tides, everyone. Today, we're diving into a topic that I think keeps a lot of policymakers up at night: the incredible, often dizzying speed of technological innovation and the seemingly glacial pace of government regulation. Anna, it feels like every other week there's a new AI breakthrough, a new crypto trend, something completely disruptive, and governments are just playing catch up, right?
Absolutely, Ethan. It's like trying to regulate a speeding bullet with a rubber band. The very nature of tech is designed for rapid iteration and disruption. Laws, on the other hand, are built for stability, for deliberation, for public discourse. They're almost fundamentally at odds. Look at generative AI. It went from niche concept to mainstream phenomenon in a matter of months, maybe a year. How do you draft comprehensive legislation for something that's changing that fast?
And it's not just the speed, Anna, it's the sheer complexity. Legislators are often not tech experts themselves, and they're trying to understand highly technical concepts to draft laws that will protect the public without stifling innovation. It's a tightrope walk. You have to consider privacy, data security, misinformation, market dominance. It's a minefield of potential harms, and they're often trying to legislate on things they don't fully grasp. That's a huge problem, you know?
Ruby brings up a critical point, and it's compounded by the global nature of these technologies. A company develops an AI in Silicon Valley, but its impact is felt in Europe, Asia, everywhere. Whose laws apply? Who has jurisdiction? We saw this with GDPR in Europe, which was a massive step for data privacy, but it still faces challenges with enforcement against global tech giants. Trying to regulate a borderless internet with territorial laws is inherently difficult.
That's a fantastic point, Oscar. It's not just about one government figuring it out, it's about a collective effort that rarely materializes at the speed needed. So let's talk about some specific areas where this struggle is really visible. Social media, for instance. It's been around for over a decade, but we're still grappling with basic questions about content moderation, algorithms, and their impact on mental health and democracy.
Social media is a prime example of where governments waited too long. In the early days, it was seen as this incredible tool for connection and free speech. There was a reluctance to regulate because of the innovation narrative and the fear of stifling growth. Now, we're seeing the fallout. Widespread misinformation, echo chambers, cyberbullying, serious mental health impacts on younger generations. And trying to retroactively regulate it feels like closing the barn door after the horses have bolted, doesn't it?
Exactly, Anna. And the companies themselves resist regulation heavily, citing free speech or proprietary algorithms. But at what point does their right to innovate infringe on public safety or individual rights? We've seen documentaries and internal whistleblowers expose how these platforms consciously designed features that exploit human psychology for engagement, leading to addiction and polarization. Governments have a duty to protect their citizens, and for too long, they've been outmaneuvered or simply too slow to act.
And the solutions proposed are often so blunt they risk unintended consequences, like mandating age verification for all social media, for example. While well-intentioned, it could create massive privacy issues or disproportionately impact certain user groups. Or take Section 230 in the U.S., a foundational law for online platforms. Repealing it entirely could lead to platforms over-moderating to avoid liability, or conversely, becoming cesspools. It's not just about regulating, it's about regulating smartly.
Smart regulation is the key, but how do you get there when the landscape is shifting so fast? Let's pivot to AI. We're seeing deepfakes, autonomous weapons, AI in critical infrastructure. The potential for harm is immense, yet the technology is evolving daily. Are governments even capable of understanding what they need to regulate before it's already widespread?
I think with AI, there's a unique challenge: the black box problem. Even the developers often don't fully understand how a complex AI model arrives at certain decisions. How do you regulate something where the internal workings are opaque? It moves beyond just a lack of technical expertise among legislators to a fundamental issue of transparency within the technology itself. This isn't just a regulatory gap, it's an epistemological one.
And the ethical considerations are mind-boggling. Bias in algorithms, job displacement, questions of sentience, even existential risks. We're talking about fundamental changes to society, and we need robust ethical frameworks before the technology is fully deployed, not after. But that's incredibly difficult when the industry is racing to be first to market. They're often creating the problems that governments then have to scramble to solve, and the public bears the risk.
Some countries are trying to get ahead of it. The EU, for example, is pushing forward with the AI Act, which categorizes AI systems by risk level and imposes different compliance requirements. It's a principles-based approach, focusing on the applications and impacts rather than the underlying technology itself, which allows for more flexibility as the tech evolves. But even that's taken years to draft and implement, and AI has already moved on in many ways.
That's an interesting approach, Oscar, regulating the impact rather than the tech itself. But even with that, it sounds like governments are still struggling with definition and scope. Let's not forget crypto. It's probably the most Wild West of all these areas. Volatility, illicit finance, environmental impact, scams, and yet also potential for financial inclusion and innovation. How do you even begin to regulate something so decentralized and global?
Crypto is fascinating because it fundamentally challenges the idea of centralized authority, which is what governments embody. Blockchain's distributed ledger is designed to operate without intermediaries. Regulating it is almost antithetical to its core philosophy. That's why we're seeing this patchwork of approaches, some countries banning it, some trying to integrate it into existing financial frameworks, others creating entirely new categories. It's chaos.
And while they're figuring it out, ordinary people are losing their life savings in scams or market crashes. The promise of decentralization is alluring, but the lack of consumer protection is a huge concern. FTX, Terra Luna, all those collapses showed how vulnerable people are when there's no central oversight. Governments need to step in to prevent widespread financial harm, but the tools they have are often ill-suited for this new asset class.
Precisely. The regulatory challenge with crypto isn't just about defining it, is it a security, a commodity, a currency, but also about enforcement. How do you go after anonymous actors operating across borders? This is where international cooperation becomes not just helpful, but absolutely essential. Bodies like the FATF, the Financial Action Task Force, are trying to establish global standards for anti-money laundering and counter-terrorist financing in crypto, but it's a slow, uphill battle.
So, we've identified the pace of innovation, lack of expertise, the global nature of tech, and the inherent complexity as major hurdles. What are the broader consequences of this regulatory lag? Besides the immediate harms we discussed, what's the long-term impact on society and even on government legitimacy?
Well, for one, it erodes public trust. When people see tech companies operating with impunity, causing harm, and governments seem powerless to act, it creates a sense of cynicism. It also leads to regulatory arbitrage, where companies simply move their operations to jurisdictions with laxer rules. This creates a race to the bottom, which is bad for everyone in the long run, and it stifles responsible innovation too.
And it creates an uneven playing field. Small, ethical startups that want to do things right are often at a disadvantage against larger players who can afford to lobby heavily and push the boundaries of what's legal or ethical. It means that the biggest, most powerful tech companies continue to dominate without accountability, accumulating unprecedented data and influence over our lives. That's a huge democratic deficit, if you ask me.
From a policy perspective, the lag also means governments are constantly reacting rather than proactively shaping the future. They're spending resources cleaning up messes instead of setting clear guardrails that could have prevented those messes in the first place. This makes policy development less efficient and less effective, and it leads to a cycle of crisis management that can exhaust public resources and political will.
That's a grim picture. So what are the potential solutions? Are there any models or approaches that governments could adopt to become more agile, more responsive, more effective in this incredibly fast-moving tech landscape? Oscar, you mentioned the EU AI Act. What else is out there?
I think regulatory sandboxes are a promising model. These allow companies to test new products or services in a controlled environment under relaxed regulatory requirements for a limited period. This gives regulators a chance to observe, learn, and then craft more informed, proportionate rules. It's been successfully used in fintech in places like the UK and Singapore. It's about co-creation, not just top-down enforcement.
I like the sandbox idea because it fosters innovation while giving regulators a front row seat. We also need more tech-fluent policymakers and advisors. Governments should actively recruit people with deep technical backgrounds, not just lawyers and economists. Imagine having engineers, data scientists, and ethicists embedded within legislative bodies helping to draft laws from an informed perspective. That would make a huge difference.
Absolutely, Anna. And on top of that, we need to shift from solely reactive regulation to more anticipatory governance. Instead of waiting for the harms to manifest, governments need to invest in foresight. We should be doing regular tech impact assessments for emerging technologies, engaging with civil society, academics, and even ethical hackers to understand potential risks before they become widespread. It's about being proactive and preventative.
Foresight and expertise makes total sense. But what about the global coordination aspect? Oscar, you talked about how tech is borderless. How do we get countries to agree on common standards when they all have different political systems, economic priorities, and even cultural values around things like privacy or free speech?
That's probably the biggest challenge. There's no silver bullet, but increasing diplomatic efforts at multilateral institutions like the UN, OECD, or even just G7, G20 discussions specifically on tech governance are crucial. We also need to move beyond just national regulators talking to each other and bring in technical standards bodies, academia, and even responsible industry players. Common principles can be established even if the exact implementation details vary by jurisdiction. It's a marathon, not a sprint.
And maybe we need to encourage industry self-regulation, but with robust oversight. If companies know that if they don't act responsibly, governments will step in with heavy-handed regulations, it could incentivize them to develop their own ethical guidelines and compliance standards. It's a tricky balance, though, because you don't want the fox guarding the henhouse, so to speak.
That's where I have some skepticism, Anna. We've seen industry self-regulation fail repeatedly. Their primary motive is profit, not public good. So while I agree they have a role, it needs to be within a clear, legally binding framework set by governments. We can't trust them to police themselves completely. There need to be real consequences for non-compliance, not just fines that are a drop in the bucket for these massive companies.
So we're talking about a multi-pronged approach. Sandboxes, bringing in tech experts, anticipatory governance, and enhanced global cooperation. It sounds like a lot of heavy lifting. Do you feel optimistic about governments eventually catching up, or are we destined to always be several steps behind?
I'm cautiously optimistic, Ethan. The conversation is happening now in a way it wasn't 5 or 10 years ago. Policymakers are more aware of the issues. The public is more aware. The sheer scale of tech's impact is undeniable. It's no longer just a niche concern. The challenge is converting that awareness into effective, agile policy, but I do think we're seeing glimmers of progress in certain areas.
I'm probably more on the pessimistic side, to be honest. The power and lobbying might of big tech are immense. They can influence elections, shape narratives, and outspend any public interest group. While there are good intentions and smart people working on this, the structural imbalances are still very much there. Until we address that fundamental power dynamic, governments will continue to be at a disadvantage. It's not just about speed, it's about political will.
I lean towards Ruby's perspective on the challenges, but I think the momentum is shifting. The public outcry over things like social media's impact or AI's potential risks is growing, and that translates into political pressure. It won't be easy and it won't be perfect, but I believe we'll see more sophisticated and coordinated regulatory efforts emerge. It just takes time, and unfortunately, technology doesn't wait for policy.
Time is indeed the critical factor. It's clear there's no easy answer, and the challenge of regulating fast tech will continue to be one of the defining issues of our era. It requires continuous dialogue, adaptation, and perhaps most importantly, a willingness from all sides, governments, tech companies, and citizens, to engage constructively. Thank you, Anna, Ruby, and Oscar, for this incredibly insightful discussion. It's given us a lot to think about.